Hello, welcome to the weekly review program of South Sudan Network. My name is Roger Alfred Yoron-Modi. I'm the producer and the host. The weekly review, which is a program of South Sudan Network, makes sense of relevant topics and news. And as you know, South Sudan this year will be 9 years old by July 9th, and there has never been an election. The people of South Sudan have not been able to elect their leaders since independence. And in 2015, a constitutional amendment was done, and also a peace agreement was signed. The agreement provided for elections to be conducted towards the end of the transition, but still again war erupted, and so that period of elections was missed. So right now we have the revitalized agreement on the resolution of the conflict in South Sudan. It has provided for elections to be held, and one of the mandates of the current revitalized transitional government of national unity is to conduct elections towards the end of the transition, 60 days before the end of the transition. And today we shall be discussing those issues of elections, given that also right now there are some fighting in some parts of the country, and also the slow implementation of the peace agreement. Will the elections be held on time, as required in the revitalized agreement, the resolution of the conflict of South Sudan? How is the preparation going so far? So I'm joined today by Rita M.Lopidia. She's a co-founder and executive director of EVE Organization for Women in Development, and a representative of the Women Coalition at the reconstituted Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission, the body monitoring the agreement. And also she is the co-chair of the Transitional Justice Committee of the R-ARCSS. Welcome to the weekly review, Rita M.Lopidia.
Thank you so much, Sawa, for inviting me for this interesting talk show.
Right now, you're involved in most of those processes, and including the implementation of the agreement, given that also the Women Coalition is a party to the agreement, it's a signatory to the agreement. How things are going? How are things going so far with regards to elections? Are you able to see that elections will be done on time this time, as required in the agreement, or the preparations that are supposed to be happening, the implementation and so on, are going to affect that?
Thank you very much. In my opinion, I would like to start by saying we are almost 2 years into the transition period, and up to now, the implementation of the agreement is not as expected. It is very sluggish, and a number of critical provisions in the agreement has not been implemented. Before I go into the issues of election, as you have mentioned earlier, it is unfortunate that South Sudan didn't get the opportunity to have elections since it gained its independence in 2011. Remember, we are supposed to have elections just before the conflict erupted. So when it comes to elections in South Sudan, it is unfortunate that we have not had the opportunity to have elections since the independence of South Sudan. And it is due to a reason of factors. One, before the set time for elections arrived, the country just went into conflict. And I think it is important for us to note why we went into conflict before the elections was done. Remember, in 2012, there was a grassroots consultation that was conducted by the SPLM as a party to see to get feedback from the grassroots on how this country should be run. And I think the feedback from that consultation is very clear, that there is clearly leadership failure, because up to 2012, the people of South Sudan, when they voted for secession, we had a lot of hopes that once we have our country, we'll be able to see development, and the situation that people lived in before will change. But unfortunately, until 2012, the people, especially the grassroots, were not seeing things happening. And the recommendations that came from them, or the feedback from that consultation, was that there is clearly a failure in leadership. And when that happened, we saw how SPLM then dragged the country into conflict. And unfortunately, we are not able to have elections. But taking us fast forward into the revitalized peace agreement, I think it is important to note that for the country to have elections, there are certain conditions that needs to be met. And as we talk right now, you know, the revitalized peace agreement called for elections to be conducted, as you have rightly mentioned, 60 days before the end of the transitional period. But before that, a number of things are supposed to happen. One is the National Elections Commission that needs to be reconstituted into a competent and an impartial body. And this is supposed to be done 7 months into the transition period. This has not happened. And there was a need, the agreement also mentioned that the amendment of the National Election Act has to be conducted 2 months after the adoption of the permanent constitution, such that the National Elections Act conforms with the terms of the permanent constitution. However, generally, before we talk into the country going into elections, we need to see into factors that are supposed to contribute into this country going towards elections. First and foremost, there are key aspects of the agreement, because for the transition period to be completed, the agreement needs to be implemented. And there are key aspects of the agreement that needs to be fulfilled before we talked about election. First of all, up to now, we don't have a full Artigono in place. It has been 2 years since the start of the transition, and the government is only partially formed. And to date, we don't have the revitalized legislature, and therefore a number of legislations or a number of laws that are supposed to be passed, it's not yet done. And it is important to note that the full government is necessary for us to be able to implement other aspects of the agreement, as well as stabilize the country and prepare the country for elections. For instance, now,
there have been reports that the schedule stipulated in the agreement are being amended because some of those reforms and some of those tasks have not been done. So given that some of the schedules no longer make sense because they have been bypassed, there are reports that those amendments are being done. As somebody in the RJMEC, do you see that is that true? Is that happening?
As far as I know, the agreement provides for the parties to sit down and amend. But officially, I haven't heard that the parties to the agreement has sat and agreed on an extension of the timeline of the agreement, unless it is not something public. And I've not heard that also in the RJMEC meetings. So I'm not aware of that. But I think we need to look into key aspects in the implementation of the agreement for us to say whether we are ready for elections or not. Because there are a number of things that needs to be in place. Today, the security arrangement is one of the chapters of the agreement that is fundamental for the success of the R-ARCSS. I mean, people have been in the cantonment areas and training centers without graduation into a unified force. The necessary unified forces of around 83,000 who are expected to take charge of security during the transition is not in place. So basically, the focus of the whole peace agreement is in the formation of the government. And the formation of the government has not yet even trickled to the grassroots, because the most important part of the government, I think, is the local government. And I think it is important that the formation of the government trickle down from the national to the Boma level. And if the people in the grassroots does not feel secure, does not feel the peace, how can we say that there is peace in this country? Because most of the time people limit South Sudan to Juba. But we need to understand that there is still significant amount of time left if the parties are really committed to ensure that by the time we clock to the 36th month, we are able to do some of these things if there is political will to move this country forward.
Now, the country itself, you know, the people of South Sudan, do you see that the people are politically prepared to even hold elections, or even, as you can see, lessons from other countries right now, Uganda and even the US, both countries who just had the elections. And for us, our people, given that the experience is different. The last time we had elections was 2010. And also there are many factors, many circumstances that have occurred throughout the years. The hate and war and lack of reconciliation and incitements have been happening online. Also with the rise of, you know, the changes in technology and the advancement now in social media. How are people going to be able to handle that elections? Or what should we be preparing ourselves for, given that this is the situation?
As I mentioned before, I think before we even start talking about the people being prepared for elections, I think I would like to raise some key points, of which I've talked already about the security arrangement. You cannot start talking about elections when there is no full security in the country, or some level of security that will protect people, that will give confidence for people to come out and feel secure to participate in any elections. Secondly, the permanent constitution making process is crucial for us to talk about elections, because we need to have the permanent constitution in place, and then the National Election Act will be amended, you know, to conform with the permanent constitution. And then thirdly, and most importantly, the agreement talked about addressing key challenges. The challenge of, you know, the reconstruction. We need to repatriate and resettle and rehabilitate and reintegrate the IDPs and the returnees. This is critical, I mean, for peace building and also elections. Mm-hmm. They are supposed to be part of this process. So far, we have seen that there are still some security issues in some of the states or in some of the parts of South Sudan, and we still have a huge number of refugees in Uganda, in Ethiopia, and in Sudan. Well, since the agreement is signed, there are a few voluntary returnees to this country, but majority of the people are still in the refugee camps and the IDP camps within the country. So if people don't come out, a clear indication that people are ready is when they feel the refugees and the IDPs voluntarily come home in big numbers. This will be an indication that there is something happening and people are ready to come back home and participate. And the precondition to that is the security. So far, these conditions are not in place. And I think one of the most important things that I would like to raise for us as Junubin in general is that, you know, the citizens, since our independence, most of us are reluctant. You know, we keep on watching what is happening in the country, and we keep on complaining, but we're not participating. So I think fundamental to any process of peace building that will lead us to elections and then democracy and development, it is crucial that citizens must be center of this process. Citizens have the responsibility also to come up and participate. Therefore, there is a need in this period that, and this is where the role of the civil society comes in. There is a need for awareness, there is a need for sensitization, such that the citizens of South Sudan know that it is their responsibility to be part and parcel of this process. The citizens should be able to question the government. The citizens should be able to push the government that up to now we are not seeing security arrangements in place. Up to now, the full government is not in place. In the local government, at the lower level, we don't have rule of law. We don't have a government in place. There are a lot of issues of security. The citizens of South Sudan cannot continue to be bystanders in this.
You talked about the permanent constitution making process, and there are reports we've been hearing that the workshop that is supposed to be conducted by the R-ARCSS on that process of preparing, starting as one of the processes for the making of the permanent constitution is happening. That was supposed to be the end of this month, but now it's pushed a bit further. Tell us more about what is happening regarding that workshop and when it's going to start, because it is stipulating the agreement and is key in the making of the constitution.
I think so far the workshop has not been done. It was scheduled to take place the first week of February, but I think it's being pushed to a future date, and probably something that will be discussed in the next R-ARCSS meeting. But as far as I know, Max Planck is an institution that is contracted by R-ARCSS to help in the permanent constitution making process. And so far, there has been sensitization meetings or workshops that have been going on to prepare the parties and the stakeholders in the process of the national constitution or the permanent constitution making process. There are a number of consultations going on within the civil society, the women's group, to see how we can all prepare for the permanent constitution making process. I think it's a crucial chapter in the agreement, and it is something that the people of South Sudan should be aware of. And even the permanent constitution making process should be centered around the people, and it should be an inclusive process.
And then how about the impact of the other parties that are still in conflict with the government, the parties that have not signed the revitalized agreement, the holdout groups? There are peace processes going on with them, and we don't know whether it is going to be finalized before the elections, or how are you seeing that also as people in the R-ARCSS? Do you see that affecting the elections, or they're going to be part of the process through another agreement?
And so far, the other holdout groups have signed the cessation of hostilities agreement. And as far as I know, they have started discussing key issues or the points that they want to raise and see change in this country. But the challenge we have is that even within this period, it is not only the out or the holdout groups that are having issues. For instance, recently there are issues between the SSPDF and the SPLM-IO. These are also causing insecurity in the country. And that's why I have been saying, you know, the implementation of the transitional security arrangement is key to the success of the transition period and moving the country into election. But having said that, it is important that the RT-GONO continue in the dialogue with the holdout groups. And dialogue is always important to bring people together. And hopefully they will reach some sort of agreement such that all the concerns that are raised and it's being addressed during this period. But I think it's crucial that the dialogue continues with those who are still holding arms. And we hope that both parties, the RT-GONO and the holdout group, basically the SOMA, adhere to the cessation of hostility agreement that they have implemented. But most importantly, I think, as far as I know, from the holdout groups, there are certain areas that they want to see implemented. They talked about the issue of federalism. They talked about addressing the root causes. And I think if you look into the revitalized agreement, some aspects of this are already reflected in the agreement. So if RT-GONO focus on implementing the revitalized agreement in letter and spirit, and I think with time, some of these root causes would be addressed. And eventually, those who are still out there would be able to join in with the Rome process going on. Hopefully the country will be on the right track to democracy.
As we head towards the end of the program, you talked about meeting the government and the RJMEC recently. Maybe you brief us with the outcomes or the issues during the meeting.
Well, in the past week, the South Sudan Women Coalition met, and we reviewed the implementation of the peace agreement. And we thought as a stakeholder to the agreement, it is important that we continue with our advocacy efforts to ensure that at least we meet the parties and the important stake or the key stakeholders to this process to ensure that we keep up the pressure. And the reason being is the sluggish implementation of the peace agreement. And also being an interest group, and our interest is to ensure inclusivity in the implementation of the peace agreement. We also raised the concern of the lack of implementation of the 35% affirmative action for women. That has not been met by certain parties to the agreement. This is a commitment from the parties that they will ensure that the revitalized RT-GONO is inclusive, is diverse, and as one of the conditions that they have set or what they have agreed on is to meet the minimum 35% women's representation. And as Women's Coalition, we just find it difficult to understand why it is a challenge for the parties to meet the 35% that they have agreed upon. Because if you look at the parties, I think the narrative that there are no women in these parties is just not holding water, because we know there are women in these parties and there could be more than even 35% in these political parties. So we find it difficult to accept the argument that there are no women in these political parties. The reason we met RJMEC is because it is the body that is responsible for monitoring and evaluating the implementation of the peace process. And one of the key points we discussed, of course, is generally the slow implementation of the peace agreement, and particularly the security arrangement, because it affects women and families. Now we have seen UNMISS removing people from the POC camps, and now they are in IDP camps. So it is now the role of the government to ensure that the conditions needed for these people to go back to their places is security. So we called on RJMEC to really talk with the parties to prioritize the security arrangement at this time. And of course, we talked about the issue of inclusivity. We felt RJMEC is not doing enough, is not pushing the parties enough to ensure that they adhere to this provision. And we also talked about the need for RJMEC to be more visible to the people of South Sudan, because right now we feel that they are limited to sending updates on emails, and not all the people in South Sudan really access email. But it's important that RJMEC reach out through the radios to reach the communities and let communities know what is happening in terms of the implementation of the peace agreement. With the governor of Central Equatoria, because we have a series of advocacy meetings, and our meeting with the governor of Central Equatoria is also to push for first the 35%, which is our main interest. And we think Central Equatoria is a key state because it hosts the government of South Sudan, and they need to set the precedence of implementing the 35%. We congratulated them for appointing a woman as a deputy governor, but we also hope they can go further. And there are a lot of challenges in Juba, so we thought it is crucial that we have a female mayor, female mayor of Juba, and see what the women can do in terms of, you know, a number of challenges environmentally in Juba, in terms of, you know, just public health. There are issues of insecurity. So we felt it is also time to give this position to a capable woman to be the mayor of Juba City. And of course, we discussed the general implementation of the peace agreement. And importantly, the governor also highlighted the need for the civil society really to pick up on sensitizing the public, especially the citizens, such that they also play an important role, because awareness of the citizens in their civil responsibility is also crucial. So we have a number of other advocacy meetings that we hope to schedule with the first vice president and the chairpersons of the parties to the agreement, and see how we can push forward the implementation of the peace agreement. Because for us, peace is fundamental, peace is important. We will move this country into development and democracy.
Well, finally, the importance of general elections and the importance of having elections as per the revitalized agreement. What would be your message to the government on those areas? The government, the parties that are implementing the agreement, and also the monitoring body RJMEC, and the people of South Sudan also, who are going to be the voters.
First of all, I would like to start with generally the people of South Sudan and also the parties, that it is important that we put our country first. And whatever the situation is, our allegiance should be to the laws and to our constitution and not on individuals. We should understand that as civilians, we have responsibility to call out on our leaders, and that no one is above the law, and that there should be inclusivity in taking this country from where it is into development. For the parties, it is important that we move beyond the division of positions. I think 2 years is just way too long to be stuck in just forming the government. We need to see the security arrangement being implemented. We need to see the constitution process moving forward. We need to see that refugees are coming back. We need to see that the transitional justice process kick up. We need to see reconciliation. We need to see, you know, people coming out and airing out their grievances such that we leave behind these things and we build this country. I think the parties have a huge role to play, and it is important that, as I mentioned, that we put our country first. South Sudan being in the circle of conflicts and transition is not in the interest of anyone, be in the parties or the civilian. I think we need to see something better. We need to see South Sudan going through elections and going past the transition period to see what is next for us. I think we have been in this circle for so long, and if there is anything that the leaders could do for the future generation is to move this country out of transition, out of conflict, and we have peace and develop this beautiful country together.
With that, we've come to the end of the program. Thank you very much, Rita M.Lopidia, the co-founder and executive director of EVE Organization for Women and Development, and a representative of Women's Coalition at RJMEC. She's also the co-chair of the Transitional Justice Committee of the RJMEC. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sawa, for hosting me. Thank you.
And to our dear viewer, with that, see you next week.